When the global economy collapsed in the early 1930s, food insecurity became immediate, personal, and relentless. Grocery shelves emptied, wages vanished, and relief systems lagged behind reality. What followed was not a romantic return to the land, but a rapid, practical adaptation. Across the United States and much of the industrialized world, ordinary people converted their backyards, vacant lots, rooftops and alleys into food-producing systems. These were not hobbies. They were survival infrastructure built under pressure, and they offer lessons that still matter today. Home gardens became decentralized food systems almost overnight. By 1932, millions of households were growing food, often with no prior agricultural experience. City governments, churches, factories, and relief agencies actively encouraged backyard and community gardening as a way to reduce hunger and social unrest. In Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, and New York, vacant land was divided into plots and distributed to unemployed families. These gardens reduced dependence on fragile supply chains and stretched limited cash for rent, fuel, and medicine. What made these gardens effective was their focus on calories, storage potential, and reliability. Families planted potatoes, beans, cabbage, carrots, onions, beets, and turnips. These crops were chosen because they produced heavily, tolerated poor soil, and could be stored through winter. A single backyard could supply hundreds of pounds of food per year if managed correctly. This was food security achieved through scale and repetition, not novelty. Seed saving and crop selection were treated as critical skills. Commercial seed catalogues still existed, but cash shortages forced many families to save seeds from year to year. This created localized seed resilience. Plants that performed well in specific neighborhoods were saved and replanted, gradually adapting to microclimates and soil conditions. Tomatoes, beans, squash and corn were common seed-saving crops because they were reliable and easy to reproduce. This practice reduced dependency on outside suppliers and ensured continuity even when money disappeared. From a modern survival perspective, this is a reminder that food security does not begin with land or tools. It begins with control over seed and knowledge of what grows under local conditions. Where regulations allowed, families kept chickens, rabbits, and occasionally goats or pigs. Chickens were especially common because they required minimal space, produced eggs consistently, and could be fed kitchen scraps and garden waste. Rabbits were quiet, fast-growing, and efficient converters of vegetation into meat. These animals were not pets. They were protein systems integrated directly into household waste cycles. This closed-loop approach reduced reliance on butcher shops and ration meat purchases. Manure was composted and returned to garden beds, improving soil fertility over time. Nothing was wasted because waste itself had become a liability. Gardens alone were not enough. Preservation was what made them viable. Home canning, drying, pickling, and root cellaring expanded dramatically during the Depression. Kitchens became processing centres where families worked in shifts to preserve harvest before spoilage. Pressure canners were used for meats, beans and soups. Water bath canning preserved fruits and acidic vegetables. Root cellars stored potatoes, apples and cabbage for months without refrigeration. These methods extended food availability through winter and reduced the psychological stress of uncertainty. For modern viewers, the lesson is clear. Production without preservation is fragile. Storage turns food into security. Backyard food systems rarely operated in isolation. Neighbours traded surplus produce, shared tools, and exchanged labour. One household might specialise in tomatoes, while another focused on beans or poultry. Informal barter networks replaced cash transactions. These networks reduced risk because no single failure meant total loss. Community gardens, supported widows, the elderly and the disabled. Local governments tolerated or even encouraged these systems because, they reduced the burden on relief programs. Food production became a stabilizing force in neighborhoods that were under economic stress. This cooperative model is often overlooked, but honestly, it was essential. Survival was communal, not individualistic. Agricultural extension offices, pamphlets, radio programs and newspapers, these all rapidly published guides on backyard farming, pest control, composting and preservation. The information was practical, stripped of theory and focused on results. Mistakes were costly, so the learning curves were, steep and fast. So, families learned pretty quickly which crops failed, which soils needed amendments, and how to stretch yields through succession planting. This rapid adaptation, honestly, turned amateurs into competent producers within just a single season. The speed at which people learned under pressure is, I think, one of the most underappreciated aspects of Depression-era survival. The Great Depression shows us, really, that food security does not require large farms or advanced technology. What it actually needs is adaptability, local knowledge, and, redundancy. A modern backyard can absolutely replicate these systems using things like raised beds, container gardening, rainwater capture, composting, and even small livestock where it's legal. Seed saving and preservation skills, remain just as relevant today. If supply chains falter, inflation spikes, or disruptions occur, the ability to produce and store even a portion of your own food reduces vulnerability. The Depression-era backyard was not about self-sufficiency in theory. It was about reducing exposure to systemic failure in practice. The people who survived the Great Depression did not wait for conditions to improve. They built parallel systems under pressure using whatever space, knowledge and materials they had. Their backyards became insurance policies written in soil and labour. Understanding how ordinary families achieve food security during one of the worst economic collapses in history is not nostalgia. It is preparation. These were proven methods refined under real hardship, and they remain relevant because the fundamentals of human survival have not changed. If you found value in this breakdown and want more serious research-driven content on survival history, subscribe to Battlefield of Survival. Share this with others who care about preparedness grounded in real historical experience. Knowledge preserved is just as important as food preserved.